Okay.
So yeah, we'll start the meeting soon. Welcome everybody who's watching this on video later on, uh, and we're glad you can join us even remotely or at a distance. Oh, the TP, our mystery TP is Tom Parks. He doesn't have a microphone, so that's mystery solved. I thought it might have been Tad, but that wouldn't be like him. Um, so I think we'll just go ahead and I will, if people show up, I'll bring them into the meeting as it goes along. So
Okay.
uh, take it away, Susan.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. And as I was saying, when I sort of approached this topic, I kind of tried to do a huge sort of scan, and then I started following names that just sort of like, oh, that's interesting. Well, let me go over there. So, without further ado, and I'm gonna, in order to give myself a little bit of grace with the camera and all, I'm going to turn my camera off, and then I'm going to share my screen. And are you all seeing on the side panel with everybody's faces too?
Yeah, yeah.
You are. Okay, so I think I'm going to, for purposes of this, I'm going to minimize so that you can see that. So I won't be able to see you or see a hand being raised. But do let me know if there is anything, I think I can, you all are probably seeing that too. So anyway, just scream out.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, I wanted to do something notable parks throughout history. And I'll just kind of, and I identified, let's see, we'll go there, um, sort of five different um, people or families throughout sort of a, three 300-year period of time. The first one, and the reason why I sort of picked him first, Mungo. I love that name. And I thought, gosh, that's such an interesting name. Well, as it turns out, Mungo actually is a pretty common Scottish name, as I came to find out. But anyway, the first person we're going to look at is Mungo Park. And what I found so fascinating about him is that this was a gentleman who was a Scottish explorer, and he was famous for the first sort of West African expedition, and he wrote a book about it. And then he went on a second trip and died during that travel. Um, so this gentleman, and again, I was sort of curious as to how did he get into this. He must have been from a seafaring family or something of that nature. And as it turns out, his father was a tenant farmer, a wealthier tenant farmer, but farmer nonetheless. But the father had there were 13 kids in his family, and he was the seventh and the third son. But the father had a huge interest in educating all of his children. And aside from Mungo, he had a brother who was an attorney. There were others who went into farming. There was also a brother who was sort of in like a businessman doing shipping. So I thought that was really interesting that this farmer, and he actually came from a line of farmers or plowmen, um, sort of made that type of effort with his children. He also didn't necessarily leave his daughters out because they married well as they married physicians and they married attorneys. So it's a very interesting family. So the first expedition, so Mungo Park was his father had hired a private tutor to educate his children in his home in addition to the school that they went to. They in Selkirkshire. And once he finished there, he then went on and became. Mungo was originally supposed to be a priest, but he had an interest in becoming a doctor. So he apprenticed with a surgeon in town who actually ended up becoming his father in law. He went to school um, in Scotland, where he completed his degree. He was in Edinburgh. And once he completed his degree at the suggestion of one of his sort of mentors, he signed on as a physician on expedition boat. And that I think is really what kind of caught the bug for him as far as, going and learning and doing. Because aside from sort of his interest in medicine, he also, one of his brother in laws was a very famous botanist and later in life. But, so botany was of interest to him and just sort of, I think also too, he had a bit of wanderlust. He just, he didn't live very long. He was um, in his 30s. Um, and yet it's amazing how much sort of he was able to pack into his life. So the first expedition that he went on, they went on the Gambia River and then mapped parts of its courses. And, upon his return, he had discovered several different new varieties of plants and birds. And he wrote all of this up into a book called Travels in the Interior of Africa, which was published, I guess, a couple of years after his return. And, it was a bit of an adventure story. He did, in fact, along the courses of the river, because I think most of the folks who were native to that area were suspicious of him. They didn't necessarily look at him as perhaps a trader, meaning trading goods. But they sort of thought, this was also the time where they were wondering about, slave trade and sort of their intentions. So he actually found himself in a couple of pretty dicey situations when he was on the first expedition. But I also think that it kind of drove a lot of interest in this area because it just people were fascinated by Africa and about what was going on in that land. Um, One of the interesting things is he came to feel that the Niger and the Congo merged or were one in the same river. And that was sort of the position he took to try and prove during his second expedition. Ultimately, I believe it was a German explorer, had suggested that that was not the case. And it was proven probably 25 years after Mungo's death that the rivers were in fact separate. But just an interesting that he kind of came to that conclusion. Um, oops. Oh, for some reason, I've got two of that slide. So he went on a second expedition, and this is the one and it was interesting. He was commissioned by the government to take on this trip, and he led a larger party. They ran into a lot of the same problems. And what he told his wife, he did marry when he came home from his first expedition, and before he left on the second, he married. And not only did he marry, he had 4 children, which surprises me, just the short amount of time that he was able to get all that accomplished. He also, in between his 2 trips, had set up his medical practice in Peebles, but he was sort of itching to get back on the road, so to speak. But he was commissioned by the government to go back in. He wanted to prove his hypothesis about the rivers. And he said to his wife, he sort of was trying to reassure her, we're not going to stop. We're going to kind of put ourselves into the middle of the river and we're going to just keep on coursing down. We're not going to get close to the sides, that type of thing. But ultimately, what happened to him is that when he got to the Busa Rapids, the river narrows, and there was sort of no place for him and his companions to go. And they ultimately decided their best course of action was to get off the boat because they were sort of a sitting target. And they ended up drowning. They jumped into the river, and there was only one survivor. So it just, here was this, incredible, you know, sort of explorer. Ultimately, I think they credit him with sort of launching that African exploration, that bug to do that. Of course, people had already been in Africa, certainly, but going there and sort of doing more coursing and mapping the area became much more something that people in England wanted to do. He's kind of credited with that. In Selkirk, in Selkirkshire, they erected a statue which exists to this day, and that is on the right. Um, just to sort of commemorate his travels, his journeys, and the man he was. So I tried very quickly to give you an idea, and I think what kind of why my curiosity was piqued is that he came from a long list of people who were plowmen, tenant farmers, etc. Although both his father and grandfather, did well. I was reading an article and that said his father, when he died, had an estate at a current valuation of like 300,000, which I think for a tenant farmer is a pretty good amount of money. So, the books weren't wrong in saying that he was doing well for himself. But you'll see here, I wasn't able to go much, again, John Parke, born about 1635. And I really wasn't able to go any further back than that with any confidence of the records. So let me stop there. Does anybody have any questions? Are you all aware of this person?
Well, let me just throw in that we are in the DNA project are trying to get some DNA representation for this line. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm not sure he had any children, or if he did, we don't know of any direct male descendants, but there
So
is.
he had four children. Two of his sons, one went to try, and for some reason they thought, no one was exactly sure for a long time what had actually happened to him. So one of his sons, upon reaching sort of majority, decided to go and try and find his father, but he died of disease. And then one of his other sons was in India and died of disease there. There is a third son who did, in fact, have children, but I don't know if that line ran out, and he had a daughter.
Yeah, I think we have somebody who claims to be part of this line, not a direct descendant, but a collateral line.
Yeah.
And I think we're waiting for DNA results on that. So hopefully that'll tell us a little more.
Yes.
Well,
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting. I put the camera on so I could see everybody. But yeah, no, he was just an interesting character, and I guess you know what struck me, the magpie in me, was the fact that he was an explorer, but his background was certainly interior. He wasn't from you know a background that would lead one to this. But I think, honestly, his father deserves all the credit. He really felt very strongly. And Mungo even said in writing his book, he gave his father great credit for having sort of, spent the money and really instilled in his children the great need for education. The book went on to say that his father was similar to other Scottish fathers who always wanted to educate their children to the top degree. But I don't know if that's true, or, whether it was just, talk. But anyway, let me go back to, oops, sorry.
and while you're going back, just let me add, I did have compiled a list of all of the articles in our past newsletter issues that are there in the archive on our website for members, and there are actually, I think, 3 or 4 articles over the last 30 years or more on Mungo Park, and so those will be on that list.
That's great.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, that's lineage key I. Yeah.
Ted, I went looking and I could not find it because I was trying to identify up here, I would have put our our key. So I'll make sure I change that. You said lineage key I?
Yes, lineage
Okay.
key I. And let me see. Okay, it's been a long time since I've looked at this. Peg Park, number 248, was a descendant of him, and she's now deceased. 1065, Joyce Rittenberger, hasn't renewed since 2011. I'm not sure she's alive or not. And 705, now let me check that, what the name is for that. If I think, hold on here. All right.
Hey, Susan, Dave here. So while he's looking that up, you've read the book. Maybe you said that and I missed it.
No, I was sort of, I did find the book online and I was reading it online, although,
Okay.
most of the time those books are, and obviously there are things in the book that, he was an interesting character. It's just sort of the best way to describe it. I mean, he um, certainly was a man of his age, but I think what I found so interesting was that he had multiple interests. I mean, the fact that he was categorizing new plants, he was categorizing new birds, in addition to wanting to chart the river. Again, just sort of showed the all of the different parts of his interest levels, and you kind of wonder if at the end of the day, sadly, he got very close to completing his journey when he at when he got to Busa Falls. So would have been interesting to have seen, and it makes me sad when I read that his oldest, I believe it was his oldest son, went searching for him, thinking he was being held captive somewhere. And it
Mm.
was like almost 20 years after the fact, or, somewhere in the late teens, to think that his father had been held captive for that period of time must have driven him crazy. So, but it makes me sad to think that, he died of disease, basically trying to save a father who had been long, long dead. And they were able to confirm that they sent an expedition to try and find out what happened. They were able to find the survivor, who had been a local guide, and eventually they were able to recover some of his belongings, although not his journal.
Mm.
So, but that was interesting and a bit sad. But I thought it, and again, it has made me want to go and read the book in its entirety, um, just to sort of see what got everybody so interested in pursuing that.
The
Well,
other
that's
member is number 705, Kevin Brown Park. He's a life member. He doesn't have email, so I'm not sure how one can get, you'd have to write him. Um, but his line, it's a line from, um, you know, Mongo Park with Elizabeth Hislop, Archibald, John Mongo, David James, John Gardner Park, David Gardner Park, Edward Ratcliffe Park, and then Kevin Park. So that's his line.
well. I'll look into that, Tad, and see if he's not living, we'll see if there were any male survivors and descendants that we might contact.
Yeah,
DNA.
it would be great if we
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
get a DNA from that
Now,
line.
Kevin was born in 1951, so I think you have a good shot that he might still be alive. Okay.
Okay. Yep, we'll follow that up.
Great.
Okay.
So the next is, as going through this list, I came upon the Parke golfing dynasty, and I found this incredibly interesting. Um, Again, a couple of different things. The name Mungo Park, that sort of was what got me there. But there were three brothers who all were very involved in dominating, I would say, the golf during the 1800s, and really were there at the beginning. Um, so this is a picture of Willie Park, and he was the man who won the very first British Open, which turned out to be the first golf championship that there ever was. So you could say he won the very first Open championship ever having to do with golf. And that happened in 1860. And then he went on to win it three more times. His brother Mungo won it once in 1874, and then his son, Willie Jr., went on to win twice. But as I started doing research on the family, what I found so interesting was, again, how in the heck did basically a family, of what I consider humble beginnings really kind of find themselves at the forefront of golf. And as it turns out, obviously they lived in a part of the country. They lived in, and I'm going to butcher this name, but it's Musselburgh. So it's near Edinburgh. And when they were younger kids, they were caddies. And again, it was the links golfing that was sort of popular then, but they came up among those ranks. And again, what I found so fascinating about this family is not only there wasn't a lot of, I mean, obviously today, if you're a professional golfer and you're doing well, that is your living. That's, you're making more than an adequate living. Back then, the championships were kind of not the way to make money. You picked up challenge matches. And there was another family of golfers, and I'm going to butcher the name, but there was, let me just look real quickly. Sorry, guys, I'm going to take you into my notes. But I'm just trying to find the family name. Susan. Sorry about this, folks. You would think I would. Oh, here it is. Morris. So there was an old Tom Morris and a young Tom Morris. And between the Parkes and the Morrises, they really dominated golf in Scotland, really golf in the world during this period of time. But they would pick up challenge matches. And obviously, you know what happens with challenge matches. There was a lot of betting going on. And that's really how you made your money. So in some ways, what I would say is maybe they didn't go so far from, their sort of more humble beginnings, because golf certainly wasn't the sport that it is today. But they picked up, they would go around, they would pick up these challenge matches, and they would, by and far, I'd say Willie used to play with his brother Mungo, and between the two of them, they probably outbeat the Morrises more times than not. And, it's interesting that Willie Parke also started developing golf balls and golf clubs, and started a business that actually, for the next couple of generations, they were involved with. And not only his children, but also some of his other siblings got involved in working that business with the family. And, again, he was, so I think very entrepreneurial, kind of, I'm going to make my money in a bunch of different ways. The description of these men was that they were tall and they played a very aggressive game, and that they were, aggressive at their putting, which I thought was very interesting. Again, it's a different game than it is today. I don't play golf, so I can't probably understand, that point too well. But I thought, oh my gosh, that's just, incredibly interesting. I'm going to go to the next page. This is Mungo Parke, his brother. What I think is interesting is Mungo was considered the better golf player when they were children. And, but at a kind of a young age, I think he was 14, he went and started working on a fishing boat, and he kept at that job for about 20 years. And he stopped sort of working on boats in 1873. And he only had a couple of months to get prepared for the next Open, which he won. So here's a man who's been on a fishing boat, probably hasn't played a whole lot of golf, if any, came back, had a couple of months to kind of get back into to his game, and he won it in 1874. And you know, which is fascinating. It was the only time that he won. He did come in different places. So he came in, I think his brother won the following year, Willie. And, he came in, at various different places. But, again, he was able to take these skills and he became a golf instructor. He also did some course designs, including the Alma Golf Club. And I went to the golf club's website, and they make reference to his design of the course. So I thought that was very interesting. There was a David or Davy Park's brother. There were like 13 of these children, 3 of whom were really known for their golf game. But Davy never won, but he had, he placed well in a number of the opens. And he actually came in second in 1866 to his brother. He also started working in the family business doing golf club and golf ball manufacturing or making. Then probably the one of the next generation. So it's interesting. There was a Mungo Sr. and a Mungo Jr., but the junior was actually Willie's son, not Mungo's. None of Mungo's kids, at least that I could find, ended up playing golf. But this was so Willie Parks Jr. And probably, in looking at all, and I spelled golf wrong. Sorry about that. He ended up, winning twice. But what he really became famous for was his design of golf courses, not only in Scotland, but in England, Europe, and the United States. In fact, they said for the last quarter of his life, he was in the United States almost exclusively. I've identified a couple of the clubs. The one that I know about and have seen the course is the Maidstone Club in East Hampton, New York. And it's a phenomenal course. And they said he was the pioneer of the Parkland course and the golden age of golf architecture. So he died relatively young. And they, a lot of the books attribute his death to having worked himself to death. He died of exhaustion. And he actually died in an insane asylum. They brought him back to Scotland and he passed away there, which, but they didn't give any more information as to sort of what was the cause. Was it, and when we hear an insane asylum, we think, oh my God, that's got to, mean something. But maybe perhaps that's where they hospitalized those that were sort of there. But I in some ways, it sort of makes me think that he had some type of breakdown and the family brought him home. And I thought one other quote that seems to come up, he was the first sort of golfer to write a book about the sport. And he also coined the phrase, a man who can putt is a match for anyone. So very interesting group of, 5. His brother Mungo, he played, and he did very well, but he never, of course, won anything. All of them were involved in, the manufacturing or the making of golf clubs, golf balls, and courses. So very interesting family. And there are a couple of Parks who were more on the contemporary golf, professional golfing. But I didn't have a chance to really look into whether any of them were actually descendants of these Park members. They were in the United States, but I couldn't tell whether their family had maybe immigrated between, the late 1800s and today. So that may be something for.
If I can jump in there, Susan,
Yeah.
Just in a recent issue in volume 61, number 3 of our newsletter, we did an article. I thought Kim Kirsteiner would be here today. I thought she was going to join us, but her grandfather, Sam Parks Jr., won the 1935 U.S. Open and was quite successful. So, and that's, her lineage is lineage key JP, which is genetically related to lineage key A in group 004, and that's an Ulster Parks, Scots-Irish line in Pennsylvania early on. So So there was another Parks line that did well in golf.
And then let's get to the next page. So I did their genealogical chart, and again, what I found so interesting was uh, their father. So Willie Mungo and David's father, James, was a plowman laborer, and again, I think it was probably you know, the fact that they lived so close to where, golf was really sort of being played and kind of building is how they kind of got into it. They saw an opportunity. They played as young children. They caddied and um, and were able to sort of pivot into making it a career for themselves. Um, Again, wasn't able to go too far back. I think their beginnings are pretty humble, but you can see they're really in that Inveresk, Walliford, Musselburgh, which is all around Edinburgh. Um, you see a great deal of sort of that area. And again, I think it was proximity to something that was going on. I didn't find them in the chart, Tad. Maybe you have them listed because there were a number. They all had children, but I couldn't find any. Tad still there?
Yeah, he's muted.
Okay, it's been a long time since I've looked at this line, and I'd have to go back and review it again.
Okay.
Okay, but it has been a very long time since I've gotten into this line. I'm sorry, I'm not. I wish I was more up to date on that. So,
Well, we can always revisit these things, down the
Absolutely.
road. Yeah.
Absolutely. I get the next. So the next person I looked at was Charlotte Parke. Like I said, I really wanted to find women who had distinguished themselves in one way or another. And Charlotte was very interesting for a lot of different reasons. Her father passed away before she was born. He died in March, and she was born in December. I mean, she was born in March, and he died, I think, 3 months before she was born. So, she never sort of knew her dad, although I'm sure she knew her Park family. She was raised, born in Concord, but her mother remarried, and her stepfather took work in Washington, D.C. So when she was in Washington and after school, she worked as a graphic artist for the Office of Strategic Services. And I kept thinking, all along, why does intelligence agency need graphic artists? I'm still not sure during World War II, but it was sort of, you know, um, while there, that she met her husband, who was also in and of himself James Brooks, and, a more well-known abstract expressionist artist. And from there, they went to Manhattan, and then they went out to first Shelter Island, and then they ultimately found themselves in East Hampton. And there is, certainly an artist community there, but they kind of landed at a time when Jackson Pollock was there, and Lee Krasner and others. She really, she continued to keep producing art, but she was certainly not as well known as her husband or a lot of her other contemporaries. And but they interviewed her probably toward the end of her life, and she said, I really felt that my husband was such an introvert that he really needed management, and I needed to turn my attention to sort of assisting him. There was a gentleman who wrote for Art Forum, Robert Pincus Witten, who said hers was a major gift, all but stifled by the happily embraced domesticity and by the critical bullying of a brutal doctrinaire art world. I think it's hard to say. I picked one of her pieces that I thought was really interesting. This was from the 1950s, and she her work, it evolved over time, but it was really, really interesting. And again, I think she's finding an audience. Her work continues to sell. It'll remains to be seen whether or not it will continue to grow. She has there is a brother. She had a slightly older brother, but she and her husband, they never had any children. Um, so I'm not sure if her line continues, but I'm going to go to the next page. I was able to find her. She is lineage key R, and here is her chart. Her brother's name, by the way, is George Coolidge Parke II. And so again, her chart and her lineage is very, well established for us.
Susan, if you go back to the previous slide,
Yeah.
I'm going to show you all what a Philistine I am in terms of the art world and everything. When I look at that image, you know what I see? To me, maybe it's the time of year. It looks like Santa Claus sitting in a chair waiting for some kid to hop on his lap. I'm
Oh,
sure
that's
that's not
funny.
what it was supposed to be.
Well, she didn't give her, that was another thing that they said was that she was more talking about color and movement and her titling of her artwork. And she really did not, sort of identify it to a shape or an image, you know. So it could very well have been that her inspiration was Santa. I don't know. But yeah, no, she's and I have here's a picture of her. It looks like they're either on Shelter Island or out it looks like Shelter Island. Well, maybe not. It's a camp. Um, but and if you've ever had a chance to go out to Eastern Long Island, Jackson Pollock Studio is open to the public. So that's a very interesting tour to take. And the Brookses were neighbors of them. So how we got to this, Roy Reg Park. And I think Ken, you're the one who kind of had me going down this rabbit hole. Um, he was a bodybuilder, and he was Mr. Universe, and he also was, an actor. And again, I think what kind of I found so interesting about him was, he kind of came into this profession, if you will, and sort of followed it along because his father had, when he was growing up, a barbell company and a gym. And so it makes perfect sense that he would find that as a career path. Also, too, he was, and again, in the research, Arnold Schwarzenegger really looked up to him as, an inspiration in his bodybuilding and things of that nature. And you also wonder if perhaps not only did he influence Arnold in bodybuilding, but perhaps going into films as well. So it's interesting. We're not necessarily familiar with his work in the United States, but he was Hercules in, I think, 3 or 4 Italian films. And so he had a bit of a cult following in Italy. And after he completed his time sort of in films, he moved to South Africa and became a trainer. But let's see, I'm going to go to the next thing. So there he is in his Tarzan role. But I thought that was a pretty good picture. And I also was able to put, again, I once I started with Mungo and sort of his, lineage and what his ancestors had done for a living, I couldn't help myself but decided to sort of follow that along with everybody else. Again, this family, very interesting. They kind of ran the gamut: plumber, brewer, toll gate keeper, farm agent, wine merchant. And then for the oldest two, I couldn't find any type of, but I have to assume that they were, um, you know, in some type of merchant business or doing, something on the land.
Again, if I can jump in,
Yeah.
a few years ago, I actually made an attempt. Ridge Park had a daughter and a son, and I came close to making contact with the daughter, and I should see if I can still do that. The son I know was ran a gym out in California, and may still. I don't know, because I would definitely love to get DNA on this line and get in touch with him. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner while Reg Park was still alive. If there was had been a way to get in touch with him, because I would love to have asked him because there is the second Mr. Universe that I referred to is Ed Park, who is lineage key Z from Monongalia, what's now West Virginia, and his son did a DNA test for us a number of years ago. But they competed together and at the same time period in the early 50s, and I'm sure they knew each other, and I just wonder if both sharing the same name, if they just wondered if they might have been related. Of course,
Yeah.
not likely, since the lineage Kizi probably has again a Scots Irish, I think, origin. But I still hold out hope to get this line represented genetically, because again, the more lines like this in England we can nail down genetically, it will just add to all of our knowledge going forward.
Yes.
But I always thought it was interesting that these two men actually knew each other who shared the same name.
Yeah. No, I again, if we could find, I didn't think to maybe do a reverse genealogical chart, um, and try and find contemporary, um, you know, um,
Well, I'll get back on that. I can't remember. His son has kind of an unusual name. It's not, John or Frank or Fred or anything like that. But but I can't bring it to mind right now.
yeah, let's see. So the last two that I looked at, and they are um, US. So I called them the musical Parks. They're brothers. There was Van Dyke Parks and also his brother Carson Parks, known as Carson Parks. And both of them were songwriters and singers. And, Carson went on to do music publishing, and Van Dyke did record producing, and he was also an executive and he is still alive. And so I didn't want to necessarily, write this as there's certainly, I mean, it goes on and on. If you look up Van Dyke Parks, he is prolific. He is still producing music. He's worked from, as I mentioned here, the Beach Boys and Lil George and Harry Nilsson. But he also was involved as a record producer and an executive with Warner Brothers Records, with a lot of different groups. And he's really been busy and has had a productive music life since the 60s. And his brother had a song, and I was not aware of this. It's called Something Stupid.
You don't know that song? Oh my
I
God.
don't know it.
It
No.
was it was a big hit record, Frank Sinatra and his daughter Nancy Sinatra. And it was very popular for a good time. It's something like uh, and then I had to spoil it all by saying something stupid like "I love you."
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, he Carson was at one of our convocations, and he said that that helped furnish his house and put his kids through college.
Well,
So
I can imagine. Yeah.
the other thing he did, he had he wrote the theme song for Checker Cab, and he had his personal cab was one of those. It was, I guess, not a regular size taxi cab, but slightly larger. And that he brought that to the convocation, and it was really kind of interesting because, like the Sunday when we were checking out, he sat down at the piano and proceeded to play for a good half hour. And I don't think people realized who it was that was playing, the piano. But he was quite a character, So
And he did a DNA test for us a good number of years ago, before he passed away. Obviously, in the very early days of the DNA project, it it needs to be upgraded, and I'm not sure whether it can be, but perhaps we should reach out to his brother, or if there's a son, and get a better representation of their DNA for their lineage.
mhm.
Well, Van Dyke is still alive, and I believe that Carson has children,
Mhm.
but I don't know if he has a son. So, but and what's interesting is there were other siblings that were also musical, and their father was very musical. Their dad was a doctor, and as you'll notice, you've got Van Dyke, who was born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and then you have Carson, who was born in Philadelphia, and then the other siblings were born in other places, which I thought at first was incorrect. But the father was sort of moved around. He was a psychiatrist and had worked in a bunch of different locations. And ultimately, their dad died in Florida. But he sort of I got the sense that he had a bit of wanderlust like Mungo, and enjoyed moving around. But and that's kind of in stark contrast to the rest of his family, his forebears, because as you'll see, so Dr. Richard Parks was their father, and he was born in Leechburg, Pennsylvania, as was Dr. Clarence Thomas Parks, Clarence Carson Parks, his father, who was also a doctor. And you'll notice that the line really is in Armstrong County, Pennsylvania, which is where Leechburg is. Since the mid 1850, I'd say about 1850 or so. The father, the originator, and we don't. This is lineage key 00. John Parks, and he was born in Pennsylvania, but more on the eastern side, and was more, and then started moving sort of more western. Um, so it was interesting to see, you've got this, huge group of, people who'd sort of made this Leechburg, PA, Armstrong County, which is not a huge place in Western Pennsylvania. And they stayed there for a good long time. And then Dr. Richard Parks took off and was living in a bunch of different places. And then obviously Van Dyke and Carson Parks followed suit. Van Dyke's been in California, and Carson relocated to North Carolina, and then ultimately passed away in Georgia. Van Dyke also had done some acting, which I thought was interesting, and that kind of helped pay for school. Van Dyke also was in boarding school in New Jersey for vocal. So very interesting family. And that was the end of it. That's
And just to jump in on there, their lineage key 00 is genetically related to the Thomas of Virginia lineage key C line. So
that will be
whether they're like a direct descendant, or if it's represents a different immigrant ancestor, we don't know, but they are genetically connected.
Well, it's interesting because when we go back to John Parks, there were a number of John Parks sort of in the eastern part of Pennsylvania at the same time, in like Chester County area. And there was just no way to try and distinguish which one. I tried to go further than we have in our given name index, but there's just no way to prove one is over the other. And so, it would be interesting to see if we could somehow find a connection with Virginia,
Yeah.
and having somebody migrate up to PA.
Yeah. Well, Chester County, PA parks are lineage key A.
Yes.
They were Scots Irish who came over. So yeah, they that as far as I know, that's probably the only park line in that Lancaster, Chester County area. But Ted.
Uh, Clarence had a total of 5 children. There was a son by the first marriage, Richard Peter Parks. He's a screenwriter, and that's all I had. He was born in 1955. His second marriage, there was a daughter, Hillary Taylor Parks, a daughter, Catherine Lucinda Parks, and then a pair of twins, Clarence Carson Parks the third, and Benjamin Rutledge Parks. And born in 1973. And they were born in Los Angeles, and I have no further information on them. So,
well, Susan, thank you. That was a nice overview of a number of different categories.
I tried to pick from different times, different locations. I didn't even hit on the PARKE line, and there were a couple of folks, and maybe we'll do a follow up with and just continue this further, because it was a lot of fun to go and try and connect them into our lineage keys. And maybe the next time, I can also work with Ken and the DNA group to see if we can also tag them by their DNA identifier.
I have a question. We have an attendee here today and I'm afraid I'm not familiar with you, but Carlene Johnson, welcome. And
thank you.
Are you a Park Society member?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
My great grandparents were Park, or my maternal grandmother. She was a Park.
Okay. Do you happen to know your Park Society member number? Well, we can look it up, but
I don't know of it.
okay. We'll find it. You're in there somewhere.
I get the newsletters.
Okay. Well, you're in the database. We'll track you down.
It's nice to have another non-Park surname on the,
we are kind of heavily populated here today, aren't we?
I was Indian,
very.
But you have Park in there.
No, and that was the interesting thing too. In all of this research, I kept figuring I'd find, the different spellings, because certainly in the United States, as you do your research on parks, sometimes it's with an E, sometimes it's with an S or without an S. So, it's all very, very interesting. And Carly, my family line, I have a park that was Thomas Robert. So I go, mine's way back in my tree, but still a Park.
Well, I've done a lot of research on the Park family. This is my ancestry stuff in the back. So this thick notebook of Park, and it goes way back. They were a good group of people.
Yes.
They're all a good group of people.
Well, we're glad you joined us, and hope you'll pop in again in future meetings. I'd like to point out and welcome Fred Parks today. He's one of our newest members, living down in Tennessee, but his line actually goes back to Cornwall in England, and he has a DNA test underway. And one of the things that we are trying to determine is there is some indication that the Thomas of Virginia lineage key C line, which is a very big, prominent southern U.S. line, and then, of course, extends all through the U.S., there are indications that Thomas, who was born, he first shows up around 1728 or something like that, Virginia, I think. He was born earlier. But there's some indications that he may have been part of the Parks family on Tangier Island, small island that's in the Chesapeake Bay. There were about 5 families that were on Tangier Island very early on. One of them being Parks, the other is Crockett, and a few others. And they came from Cornwall in the late 1600s, apparently. So we're hoping to see whether Fred, whose line does come from Cornwall, if it matches that line, or if it matches the lineage key C, the Thomas of Virginia line. So we're trying to come at this from all different angles, and we're glad we found Fred and that he's joined us and he's agreed to do the DNA test. So stay tuned.
Fred, where in Tennessee are you located?
Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 30 miles south of Nashville.
I grew up in Nashville. That's where my family is.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Well, when you come back to visit, come by and see me.
Yeah, there's actually, are you originally from Murfreesboro?
No, actually,
Okay.
I was born in Chicago.
Okay, because there's a Rich Parks who grew up in Nashville and was part of a rock band that had some fame. And I wasn't going to include him because although he's a notable Park, I notable probably only to me and people of my generation, but he was part of a group called the White Animals out of Nashville. And so if you were born and raised in Murfreesboro, you would have heard the name.
Yeah.
Fred, I can't remember. Was it your grandfather or your great grandfather who was the immigrant from Cornwall?
It was my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
Yeah, the research, it looks like he was born in 1872,
Mm-hmm.
and his mother died, and then his father died about 1885, and that's when he came over here. Because some of his brothers had already immigrated over to here. So,
did you know him growing up?
My grandfather?
Yeah.
I knew him. I fortunately got to talk to him, meet him and all that stuff. But I was too young. I didn't, know to ask these kind of questions.
No. Do you remember what kind of an accent he had? Did he have a?
No, it was actually not so strong an English accent. It was kind of, American. But he was pretty old at that time, and he, had quite a number of missing teeth. So no telling how many things were going on there that changed that accent. But
well, the only reason I ask is because apparently the Parks on Tangier Island, who come from Cornwall, have made, because they've been so isolated on that island for some years, they still speak a version of English that they say is very close to, that Cornish accent.
Oh, yeah.
So I just wondered if it had come down through your line, but
nope, didn't.
But and also I keep saying I'm going to do it. It's on my list to do, but I've tracked down a couple of Parks brothers on Tangier Island who run a landscaping business, and so I can contact them and try to get at least one of them to do a DNA test, and that would be the third part of this missing triangle of who's related to who or who isn't or whatever. And actually, their father. If they can put me in touch with him, I think he's probably still living. I think he might be even younger than I am. A number of years ago, wrote several books about Tangier Island and I think about the family. So I know he would be interested. So it's on my to-do list, tracking down people and twisting
Carly,
their.
where are you located?
I'm in Aiken, South Carolina.
Okay.
I've
But
been
my Park family came up around North Georgia. That's the
Okay.
great grandfather.
I've been to Aiken years ago when I was acting. I did Oklahoma at the Augusta Opera Company with a former Miss America and former Miss Oklahoma, Susan Powell, who's still a good Facebook friend.
I
Uh,
grew up in Augusta, Georgia. That's just right across the river.
yeah, that's where the opera company is,
Yeah.
and that was in 1989. But the parents of a good friend of mine from New York City had retired to Aiken, so they had me over for dinner, and that's how I got to Aiken.
It's a good retirement area, and it's a quaint little town, lots of horses.
Yeah,
Very nice.
yeah.
I noticed when you talked before the Southern accent, I was like, okay, I'm gonna, because I've lost mine, whatever accent I had.
Well,
Because
bless your heart.
Well, I'm from Tennessee too, but I never did have a Tennessee accent because my parents kidnapped me at a tender age and took me to Ohio.
Oh,
So I grew up going back to visit my family in Tennessee, and all of my cousins would make fun of the way we talked. They thought we had the strange accent. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even growing up, I didn't have much of an accent, but I don't think I have much of an ear for language or nuance. I mean, the vocal nuance. My dad, who grew up in New Jersey, had a much stronger Southern accent than I ever did. Um, and my mother, who spent her entire life in the South, um, has a much more subtle accent than even my dad. So I think the two of us, so we struggled with languages. So we were like, well, it's got to be the ear. We don't have an ear for it.
I'm not as good as I used to be, but years ago I was pretty good at picking telling the different Southern American accents because there are several. you know, somebody from Virginia sounds very different from somebody from Alabama or Tennessee or places like that. So, and I'm sure Bill, you there in the UK, uh, you're probably good at picking out different regional accents there in the UK as well.
In the UK, yes. And they do change from 50 miles to the next 50 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, even now, even though people moved around a lot, it's still, you know, some people just naturally pick it up.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if they move from somewhere else, they'll just pick it up and take it
Of
on.
course, of course, television has softened many of those because we hear standard American English on television, and you have probably received pronunciation or the BBC.
Yeah, it's the BBC One or BBC.
Whatever.
There's some,
But,
yeah.
but I have seen a video on YouTube at some point. I couldn't find it again of some fellow who had a tremendous ear for accents, and they showed just a little map of England, and as the dot moved through the different regions, he simply kept talking, but he would change his accent to match whatever
That's interesting.
area that was in, and it was fascinating to listen to. And I think
Well, I
Yeah,
definitely,
oh yeah, must be
he,
hundreds
he,
around Britain.
yeah, and he even hopped over to Ireland. I think a bit. So, uh,
Hmm.
well, I now live outside of Philadelphia, and there's definitely a Philadelphia accent.
oh yeah.
But
Well,
I never got it.
well, thanks, Susan. That was a fun, introduction, and obviously there's enough people that we could do a different version of this, over and over. But as I
Absolutely.
say, I will finish up. I didn't get the about the first dozen Park Society newsletters scan or gone through, but I've compiled that list of
Good.
all of those articles, just pulled them out, and when I could, we knew it, what lineage key, and if they are uh, represented genetically, what DNA group they're in, just to give you an idea. And Of course, a lot of them, especially early on, were heavily weighted to the Robert of Massachusetts line, and then some with Roger of New Jersey. But as we broaden our scope to hopefully becoming a more international organization, we'll start including some of those. I'm still trying to get more British DNA. One of the subjects of a recent article was Sir Henry Parkes with an ES, who was credited as being the founder of the Australian Foundation, and he was born in Coventry, and emigrated to Australia early on and became quite prominent. And statues of him, erected, and I think there's even a town named for him. And I've been in touch with a descendant of his. Unfortunately, he's not a direct male descendant, but he said he was going to try to reach the few surviving male descendants to see if anybody would participate in the DNA project. But another thing that I've got to touch back on, but all of those lines that were, there are a lot of lines around Birmingham, in Gloucestershire, and what's the county just north? I can't think now. But anyway, I'd love to get DNA on as many of those as we can to see if they are all distinct genetic Parkes lines, or if there was enough movement back further that they might actually be related. And then, of course, to see if they match any of the known U.S. lineages that we've got in our database. That's going to be the next step, is to start connecting across the pond. Hopefully, if we can do that, then everybody sort of gains and learns a little bit more about where they came from, where their family came from, or if they're still over there, where their family went to. Because we know a lot of lines left. Well, they left Scotland and went to Ulster, or ultimately went to America, but some went to Australia, some ended up in South Africa, all those different places. Yeah. There's even a Parkes line I've seen on Facebook in South America, and I can't remember what part. And they're Irish, and I think they're from around Tipperary, but I've never reached out to any of them because I just, right now it's like one more thing on my list, but that would be interesting to see how they got from Ireland down to South America and there. So, well, next month, we hope you'll join us. Actually, it's only in about 3 weeks because we had to adjust this date a little bit. But on January 4th, we're going to have a sort of as I said, what lies ahead for the society in the next year and beyond, because there are some developments, things we're working on that will be either underway or are planned to be underway soon. And we'd like to share all of that news for you. And then in February, I think that's, well, I won't commit to the date because I don't have it in front of me, but it's the first Sunday in February. We're going to focus the first of our some meetings we will do where we'll focus on a specific DNA group in the project and really sort of bring everything to bear on it that we can. We'll try to invite all of the participants that have tested in there, anybody that's related to those lineage keys, and really assess what we've learned and what we still want to learn and how to go about that, and hopefully energize people who belong to that DNA group to, pool their resources, work together as a team, that sort of thing. And we would invite everybody to come to this because it hopefully will give you an idea of how we're going to go about that as we work our way through the different DNA groups in the project in the future. But also, just give you some inspiration of perhaps just reaching out and working with others, collaborating with others who are known to be DNA relatives. So So that's what's ahead for the next, 2 meetings after this, and then we'll take it from there throughout the year. So that's all I've got. Susan, you have anything, or Tad? Anybody else have any questions or comments or anything you want to talk about?
I have a question, but
Sure.
you probably already covered it, and I haven't been a part of it. How do the parks connect with Asians? Like one of my doctors is Park.
Yeah.
And
Well,
he's
that's
Asian.
their name, and as many times as I look it up, it never sticks. But it is a very common surname in the Korean language, and I think it's sort of a I don't know if you'd say an anglicized version of a Korean name, but it means something. But
So no connection, DNA.
no connection to any of us. And unfortunately, they are very prolific. As you know, there are a lot of, if you've ever done a search on Facebook or something like that for somebody with a Park surname, you'll get a lot of Korean Parks popping up. But we just do not have the resources or the knowledge or anything else to handle any of that line. They're welcome to start their own park society. It would be interesting, but no, we had to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah, they seem to be genetically distinct. And not to say that all of these branches of, our parks are not genetically, but they tend to, it's, and while we have expanded for international membership, we just don't have anything in our database that would be, helpful. In fact, and probably vice versa. If there is
Well,
a
yeah,
Korean park society, they wouldn't have anything to benefit us.
a good number of years ago in the DNA project, a Korean park man who lived in Korea had tested and joined, and he stayed in there for a while, but it was a very different genetic haplogroup, that represented, the Asian origin. And after a while, he left because he realized it wasn't really the place for him. And
Wasn't going to benefit him in any way.
no, and I'm surprised that as prolific as they are and as popular as DNA testing is, that they haven't formed a project for themselves.
Yeah.
At least to my knowledge. But no, they're not distant cousins. Only in the sense that we're all related if you go back far enough.
Yeah.
So, anything else? Well, thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you after the New Year's. Good holidays to everyone.
You too.
Be safe and well, and we'll see you next year, if not before.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Take care, everybody.
Well, before you all sign up, Susan and Tad, I will be there on tomorrow morning if anybody wants to drop in at our.
I've got a conflict, but I do have some homework that I know I owe to you all, which I'll have done and I'll send to you. So
Okay.
I'll be there.
Okay. Yeah, because a few things that I need to talk to you. So take care, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.